My name is Lori. Let me just consent. Yes. Okay. Um, yeah, my name is Glory. I am the one of the campus technical recruiters here at HubSpot. Um, so, campus technical recruiter, just to give a big quick breakdown on like what exactly that means. So, campus means I hire for intern and co-op positions. Technical means I focus on our software engineering, some technical compliance, and some IT roles as well. Um, and then recruiter is recruiter. Pretty straightforward. I'm actually a Northeastern alum. I graduated in 2016, um, but I've gone to campus. I went to campus like a few months ago, and there's so much that's completely different. So I feel like it's crazy to go back and feel very, very old. um, and yeah, I've been at HubSpot for 2 years now. Cool. So, quick agenda. I'm going to be going over playing a quick like intro to HubSpot video. This is specifically a video for HubSpot product. And then I'm just going to jump right into this session. So for this session, I'm going to be focusing on a few like interviewing 101 type of things, but then diving really deeply into what exactly is a behavioral interview and how can you guys prepare. And then we'll do some breakout sessions where I'll have you guys practice a few behavioral questions yourselves, just to get a bit more comfortable with like the format of these. Okay, cool. But first, let's do a quick intro to HubSpot video. And I'm gonna press play. If I could just get like a thumbs up if you guys can hear it okay. Oops. Oh, no.
How much fun are you having with that? I recently came to HubSpot from a larger company because I knew at HubSpot I would make an impact.
I think when you're a part of a small team, you have the ability to really own the space that you're working in and understand the intricacies of what their customer needs. You can have a team of 4 engineers here solving the same thing that an entire company does somewhere else.
You realize that you as an engineer can just have so much impact on where we go because there's so much to do. There's so much ground to tackle.
Everybody has a single goal, and the single goal everybody can relate to.
The culture is actually really aligned with like self-motivation, wanting to learn.
When I started HubSpot, I was actually a co-op. So I started as a student and continued to grow in my role and be able to eventually run a team at HubSpot.
HubSpot's given me a lot of opportunities that I don't feel like I would have had at another company.
We have a much stronger community because of our commitment to diversity and inclusion, really just because it creates space for everyone to be their unique selves.
In addition to being VP of product at HubSpot, I also help put on a music festival that happens annually in Atlanta called the A3C Festival and Conference. I use the HubSpot product for all of the running of the A3C festival.
I think the coolest thing about HubSpot is the scale we do things at.
We're doing between 30 million and 90 million requests per second. We know that we need to keep offering better and faster services to our customers.
We're empowering them to actually take control of their businesses and streamline it and have all their data in one place.
It's really rewarding to be able to work on a product that helps those small businesses grow.
It's just really special to be in a place where everyone comes in every day and just really cares about their work.
HubSpot hires the best, the brightest, the people that want to be able to solve for the customer and build really cool software.
Awesome. Okay, so that was a really quick intro to HubSpot. Some quick sort of hits there. So we're a software as a service company headquartered in the Cambridge, Massachusetts area. Though right now HubSpot is 100% remote until about January-ish. And in terms of the size of our company, so right now we have about 3,300-ish employees, with over 1,000 of those being within product and engineering itself. So definitely we've grown a lot in the past few years. Cool. And just a quick thing I wanted to point out as well, HEART. So if anyone is interested in like what our values are, so humble, empathetic, adaptable, remarkable, transparent. That's some of the things that are sort of valuable to us here. And then quick thing about DI&B at HubSpot. So we have 4 major groups right now that we call our employee resource groups. POCA, which is People of Color at HubSpot, Women at HubSpot, Parent Spot, and our LGBTQ+ Alliance. I believe we actually recently also rolled out a more BIPOC focused group over the past few months for Black and Indigenous individuals at HubSpot. So that's an extra resource group that we've been rolling out. And very lastly, quick recruiting talk. We are currently hiring for spring and fall co-ops, remote opportunities, because obviously with everything going on, spring co-op is starting to look like it will probably be remote. But just as a heads up, deadline to apply is October 4th. So if you're interested, feel free to apply. And again, I'll do your resume when you come through. Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into the like interview 101 part of this. And if anyone has questions as I go through, if anyone wants to hear a bit more, we can go ahead and like utilize the chat if you want. And if for some reason I'm going through it and I don't see a chat question, if somebody could just flag it for me and be like, hey, you're ignoring the chat. Just let me know. So what are the steps of an interview? I guess that's the really first thing that a lot of people will ask. So usually interviews, specifically technical interviews, if you're interviewing for a technical position, are usually broken into 4 steps. So there's resume review, some sort of coding assessment or coding problem, the behavioral portion, which is usually a phone interview, and then the technical interview itself. I added a step before resume review, which is called the informal phone chat. This usually happens if a recruiter reaches out to you directly. Maybe they might even have reached out before applications even opened. I do this sometimes as a part of what we just call like pre-application season sourcing. And these are more for just getting to know like what you're looking for and sort of preemptively telling you more about the company itself. So sometimes you'll get like an initial email from a recruiter that will be like, do you have a time to chat? And sometimes I think people will ask me like, oh, is this a phone interview? Like, what exactly is this? But usually if they say chat and you haven't even quite applied yet or you're still new to the process, it's really just going to be like more of a casual getting to understand if you're even like interested in the specific position. Cool. But first off, what is the point of a recruiter? And I bring this up because I feel like, so in our like recruiting Slack channel at HubSpot, every now and then our head of recruiting will put articles that he finds in like these like, I don't know, how-to magazines about like technical interviewing and stuff, and it's always articles about like, why do like recruiters even exist? I wish we could just skip them and just talk to engineers. So I want to give you an idea of like, what do we even do? Because I think there's a lot of confusion about like what our position is even about. So first and foremost, we're there to lead you through the process. So there are a lot of engineers at a company and their main job isn't recruiting or interviewing. So we're there to really handle the whole process, and we do it every season. So for example, at HubSpot, I hire, mostly our hiring seasons are spring, summer, fall. So I almost hire year round anyway, but we're really there to be like the person who knows about every step of the process and to lead you through it. We're also there to give you tips. So before technical interviews, I will hop on a prep call with all my candidates and give them an idea of what to expect. And that's really an opportunity to ask me like, what's going to happen? Who am I meeting with? What kind of questions are they going to ask? Because obviously every company is different. So recruiters are usually the point of contact for any of those questions that you have. Also, just to add transparency, I lead debriefs. So debriefs are at the end of your interview. I meet with all the engineers and I go candidate by candidate, and I essentially help them sort through their thoughts, because obviously we have 2 interview questions, and sometimes it can be split, and sometimes interviewers maybe are used to interviewing full-time employees, in which case I get to jump in there and be like, hey, this is an intern student, not a full-time engineer. Let's talk about coachability, or let's talk about communication. Let's talk about how they can learn. So recruiters can sometimes be somebody who's like in there to really, what would I say? What is it? Like, not fight for you, but like be an advocate for you, especially if they know about your qualifications and have gotten to know about you throughout the course of a process. Make offers and reject/give feedback. So they can be there as well to make that process for you. And then you are stuck with me even after you start at HubSpot. I always tell people, like, trust me, you're not done with me. I handle return offers. So if you do really good in your internship or co-op role and you're eligible for graduation, I actually help the process of making you that offer to come back as a full-time employee. So yeah, definitely, again, like when I give you my contact information at the start of the process, like don't lose it, keep it, because you're going to be seeing me throughout the whole thing, well past when you even start here. So that's a little bit about what exactly recruiters do. Any questions about any of that so far? I like don't even know where the chat is. I'm not doing good at this. Sorry, guys. Okay.
We're good on questions in the chat. They're empty, so
cool. But awesome. Okay, and now getting right into more on the interview process itself. So like I mentioned, that phone chat is usually optional. Not everybody does it. Some companies that start hiring a little early might do it more than others. And it's really just an opportunity to explain the position, especially if they're hiring for a more unique position. They might take the time to explain what the position entails during that phone chat. So definitely during those informal, like initial phone chats, come with those questions like, when does this position start? I saw that this position has this listed. What sort of technologies do you use? That's a great time to ask all of those questions. Resume review is obviously when we receive your resume and look over it. Most companies use an applicant tracking system. I know like some of the popular ones are like Greenhouse and Bullhorn. Some places still use like Talio and things like that. There's so many applicant tracking systems. But overall, they mostly all work the exact same. They just show you an image of the resume, and then recruiters are able to go through them and review them. For resumes, just quick tips. I mean, try to go for, I would say, depth over breadth. So instead of doing like 5 positions that you've worked in, I would say three positions, 4 bullets is usually a good thing to aim for. If you have less experience and you only have 2 positions, do more bullets, go for it. Just get really in depth about what you did there. And also if you aren't sure, like in terms of you don't have a lot of like technical co-op experience or anything like that, you can put your projects first and definitely feel free to go into depth about the projects or work you did, especially if it was in a team. People love to hear like worked on a team. I think that's always great to highlight. Cool. Coding assessments. So I think this is what freaks people out a lot. So coding assessments, I know, again, every company sort of does their own thing. I know HackerRank is pretty popular, so a lot of companies I know do use HackerRank. At HubSpot, personally, we don't use HackerRank. We have like a coding challenge that we built out internally. But yeah, ask questions before the coding challenge. If you're like, what is this? What's going to happen? If I click this link, is it going to start the timer and I have to freak out and like immediately start coding? Feel free to ask all those questions. And look around for a prep sheet. So like at HubSpot, we attach a prep sheet to the email. And I think some people miss it because they're like, what is this going to be? What language do I use? And I'm like, read the prep sheet. I swear it's going to tell you everything. So yeah, super useful. Also, I feel like people think it's cheating to like open a tab and have Google. Please Google, like feel free to Google. Everybody Googles. If you're in the middle of the coding assessment and you're like, what is that syntax I'm supposed to use again? Or anything like that, definitely feel free to Google. Most candidates are, so I don't want you to set yourself back with rules that aren't there, you know? Definitely feel free to use all the resources available to you. Cool. Oh, let me see. Ooh, I think there's something in the chat. Approachable than HackerRank. Yeah. I know HackerRank can be scary for people. I don't know what it looks like personally. I'm not an engineer, so I can't speak to the HackerRank experience. But yeah, definitely feel free to ask the recruiter ahead of time, like, is this going to be HackerRank? And you can definitely prepare yourself. Awesome. Okay. So here's what we're really going to dive into here. So what is a behavioral interview? First off, it's not about, oh gosh, okay. How do I undo this? Okay. It's not about technical. So I guess first off, why do people even do a behavioral interview if it's a software engineering position? I get that question sometimes. And I always go, that's a red flag. But you definitely, like, we don't just want somebody who shows up every day and just codes and then leaves and we never interact with them and we never like solve problems with them. There's so much more to being a software engineer than the code you write. Like, so much of it is so collaborative, especially in a full-time working environment. You're always going to be collaborating with people, whether you're on the front end and you're collaborating with back end people, or you have PMs or designers, UI, UX people. And it's really important to understand, like, is this a person who has worked in groups before? Is this someone who can really jump in and communicate and collaborate? And so the way that a lot of people will get an idea of that is through using these behavioral interviews. Yeah, so a lot of it is just really focusing on like getting to know your past experiences, and they're usually built around core attributes. So what are core attributes? At HubSpot, before we choose our interview questions, like our behavioral interview questions, we start with what we call attributes. So these are things that we think are essential to the job. So for example, at HubSpot, some of those core attributes might be communication, it might be coachability, adaptiveness, let's see, time management, things like that, that each company will sort of choose as being their most important thing. And then they build the question around that core attribute. So usually you can get a pretty good idea of what the company thinks is most important for the role based off of the interview question that they're using. So if you hear them asking a lot like about like, oh, tell me about a time you almost missed a deadline, or Tell me about a time you, I don't know, had a lot of work and had to prioritize. You can get an idea like, oh, this company really cares about how I'm managing volume. And then you can sort of go ahead and think, this is going to be a high volume position because they think it's really important I know how to prioritize things. So they think I'm going to have a lot to prioritize. You can sort of like go backward and build what the position is going to be through some of these questions. So yeah, it can really give you good insight into like the company itself and their own values. And I think it makes it a lot easier to answer these questions when you sort of think of it from that perspective. Okay, so how do you actually answer a behavioral interview question? So STAR method. I guess a quick thumbs up. How many people have heard about the STAR method before? No? Okay. This is the way. If you want to know how to answer a behavioral interview question, if you do this, you did it. Like, congratulations, check, you answered a behavioral interview question. So it's essentially figuring out like how you're supposed to answer these kinds of questions. So first thing, of course, they say is prepare. So you want to make sure you're listening to the question so you can actually answer it and think about like what situation applies. Then going into situations. So I'm trying to think like what's an example of how I would do this. So before going into like, well, I built out this, well, I was working on a data migration and it was like before you even start there, go to the situation like, oh, well, I was working at X company, or I was working on a project group of 5 people, and we were trying to build an app that blah, 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 blah. And while we were working through, so you're giving context to the situation, and that helps me understand essentially why what you did is important. Because if you just tell me, oh, well, I built this iOS app, and yeah, it had a bug and I fixed it. I'd be like, okay, why is that important? What kind of bug? Like, wait, who was on this team? What was this for? What was the app? Like, I'm just gonna have so many questions. So this is a great way to structure that. And I'm actually gonna make you guys practice this right now. So I have a few little examples for you. And what I'm going to do is have you guys break out into teams and practice these discussions on yourself. One thing I wanted to call out here, so you can see some of these questions I put in brackets. Most of the time, some of the times the recruiter will say that out loud and say like, tell me about a time you made a mistake. How did you work through it? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just say, tell me about a time you made a mistake, but they want to hear how did you work through it? Because obviously, can you imagine if you answer a question about how you made a mistake and just say, so yeah, I mean, totally crashed that server. Yeah, you should probably follow it up with, oh, don't worry, I did save the day. I did fix my mistake. I didn't just leave and sort of take off. So definitely, especially with mistake questions, they do want to hear how you fixed it and like how things ended positively. Try to always leave it on a positive note. So yeah, those brackets, sometimes people don't say them out loud, sometimes they will, but that's usually what they really want to hear about. Isn't just like a time you faced conflict, it's how did you handle that conflict. It's not just about a time that you collaborated with someone, it's how did you communicate despite the fact that you were in different disciplines. And you can sort of see some of those attributes popping up, right? So communication, things like learning. So how did you learn the ropes? That's coachability. And you can really see what they're aiming for there. Okay, so let's go ahead and break out into the breakout rooms. And what we'll do is feel free to practice these amongst yourselves. And then when we come back, I'll have some of you share your answers. and then I can sort of give you feedback. What do we think about that? Yeah? Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. And I can leave it on this page so you guys can still see the questions, which is important. Okay, so breakout groups. Can anyone help me out here with this one?
Yeah, I'm making them right now. So how long do you want them to be for again?
Let's see, maybe like 15-ish minutes. What do you think?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
I'm hoping the conversations went well. So let's go ahead and do a few practice answers here. It looks like more people are jumping in, so I'll give it a few more seconds while everyone comes back.
Oh, yeah, sometimes I think when you are entering the main session, people accidentally log out of the room. So.
Okay. Well, maybe we can start with anybody who's in here and see if anyone has an answer. So, tell me about a time you made a mistake. Anyone want to volunteer and answer for that one? If you do, feel free to raise your hand and I'll go ahead and you can unmute yourself too. Anyone want to volunteer?
I have one for that one. Oh, you can go. I just said mine.
Okay, yeah, my face is very blue right now, sorry. But so this actually happened last week. So I'm in computer systems, which is a class here. I had to learn C, which is a new language to me. And I had to do a lot of stuff with Git too. So I was pushing stuff, pulling stuff, putting it on my GitHub. And it turns out that once when I did it and I started trying to code a little more, all my files got corrupted. And it was really scary for a few seconds. And I really didn't have any idea what to do. So I was trying to figure out how to get my files back. But then I thought, I'm pushing all my stuff onto GitHub and I'm making sure, and I've been doing it pretty repeatedly since I'm new to it and I wanted to keep remembering to do it. So I checked on GitHub and it had an update from maybe 5 minutes ago, which was the last time I pushed. So I luckily got to pull everything back. I removed all the directories that I had on my computer and then I pulled everything back from my GitHub online. And luckily I had all my stuff there and it reminded me that GitHub is a gift and to never forget to pull and push. So.
Awesome. And I guess maybe for future instances, now you know like how to find things that you've lost through GitHub. So you definitely learned something new. Yeah, so in terms of my feedback for that question, I think just having maybe a bit more context, like you can definitely go more into like what exact like project were you working on or what like were you pushing through, and also feel free to I think just more context in general is always super helpful. But yeah, otherwise I think going through it with like, also don't be afraid to really blatantly at the end state like, yeah, and something I really learned from this was ...
Okay. How much context, like percentage-wise, do you think it would be too much versus too little? I was just afraid that going too much into my computer systems class would be extraneous.
Yeah, so I think you don't always have to go too into the class itself, but maybe more into like what you were working on specifically, why you were pushing it to get, and like just a little bit more on that is always useful to have.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, otherwise I like the way it flowed, and I think that's a good breakdown of like something that went wrong, how you fixed it, I think the only thing is definitely don't be afraid to lean in on like, so this is what I learned. Like, it's okay if it sounds a bit like rehearsed, but it's always useful to also, I think verbal cues wise, it's great for the recruiter too, because they're like, okay, and this is what they learned, and they can type that in their notes. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Of course. I don't know, maybe how much time do we have left? Okay, let's just get to the next one. We have like 8 minutes. So can you tell me about a time you collaborated with someone outside your discipline? Who has an example for that?
I could take this one.
Go for it.
So I'm studying data science and biochemistry, and I'm minoring in math. So I basically there's basically not that many places I could go in STEM that's outside of my discipline, but I do currently work in an environmental engineering lab where we're just analyzing tap water, looking at all the chemicals in it, and seeing how they correlate to like temperature, weather, and all that stuff. So I used to do a lot of wet lab stuff, but with all the COVID-19 situation, I'm tuning into my data science portion. And so in order to build a website for them, I have to kind of dive into the conceptual engineering part of this entire study and this entire project. And so I've been spending a lot of time talking to the PI, to some of the PhD students, in order to really get an understanding of the data, in order to visualize it and put it into a website.
So I think I'm going to follow up on that. So what's a challenge of talking to these PhD students? Like, what's the challenging part of having to communicate with these people from a different discipline?
Communicating with people coming from computer science, it's really, everything gets technical, and it's definitely very difficult to kind of take something that I've been thinking at a little bit of a higher level and kind of get on the same page with them, because just because generally I just think we kind of think in different ways just because of our disciplines. And so I think a way that I've kind of gotten through is kind of making visuals and making graphs and really and labeling them so that both parties are able to communicate well.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear. I think post-prompt, you really gave me like the meat of the question, and what I was trying to get from that is like, obviously when you're communicating with someone from a different discipline, there's a challenge there, and just really telling me about like how you overcome that challenge. So yeah, I think that gave me like that full spectrum of answer that I really wanted there. Awesome.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
So like if we're having an interview with someone and that happens, like we don't answer the question or give them what they're looking for, like would they prompt us again, or would we just kind of miss out on that?
That really depends on the interviewer. Sometimes I'll prompt people if I think maybe they were just nervous and they like missed it, in which case I'll prompt a little further. If they really want to hear that part of the question, I think for the most part they will prompt you. Not everyone does. And if you think you missed it, like if you're answering a different question later in the conversation, you're like, oh my God, I totally forgot to answer this part of it. You can always, like after you answer your next question, be like, hey, by the way, I just realized, did I fully answer that question where you were asking about this? And they might say like, oh, like, I was actually looking for a bit more context. And you can be like, oh yeah, so let me finish that. And yeah, I actually like that a lot. So that ends up being even more positive than you would think. Like, that's not a negative. I end up going, okay, cool. So this person knows how to reflect, realize that they missed something, and then act on it. Cool. Okay. Tell me about a time you faced conflict while working on a team, and how did you handle that? Any examples?
I can take this one if there's no one who's willing to go ahead. So I have worked in a couple of different teams with a variety of different experiences. So I'm going to outline 3 different scenarios for you, and each is 3 different types of people that I've struggled to work with and had to learn how to communicate with. So the first issue I struck upon was when I was in Fundies 1 taking a class over the summer. So the curriculum is really condensed and pretty rigorous. And I was working with a student who was not, in my opinion, particularly good at communication. And in general, I felt didn't really follow the set of principles the professors outlined to solve the problems, but kind of chose their own creative path to solving problems. So it was almost like she was kind of working within her own paradigm of what the class should be. And I was trying to peel back the layers to see how I could work with her and actually get the homework assignments done together. And so one of the things I had to do was I often had to kind of translate what she was trying to do into the design recipe, as they call it, that we're supposed to follow when answering the homework questions. So using the code logic she wrote up, I kind of write like a translation of, okay, so this is the equivalent in what Racket tells us how we should approach this problem. I also frequently would go out of my way to explain the reasons why we might choose that method over the way she did it, to show edge cases or cases where her logic didn't always work, and try to get her to see my way. But I also learned that sometimes when you're working in a team where it's really difficult to communicate and work together, you kind of have to just do some of the work yourself sometimes. And that's okay, and that's not the end of the world. That's part of working in a team and working with different types of people. So a lot of the time it was up to me to do 90% of the documentation. And I got good at documenting code, so see the bright side of working with different types of people and working with challenging individuals by trying to get the most you can out of that experience. I won't go into the other example because one of the other examples, because it's kind of a similar experience. The third frustration I had was when I was actually working in a team with one of my friends, and he was super enthusiastic. So he'd often end up doing a lot of the assignment before we even met to pair program. And that was really frustrating because I felt like I wasn't getting a ton out of the assignments. So I had to spend a lot of time communicating to him, hey, I'd really appreciate it if you could just wait until we came together, or at least if you have some ideas, write them down and then we can discuss them, but to not code the whole assignment in advance. But even still with this communication, it wasn't always totally clear to him where the boundary was. So I'd frequently have to go over the material on my own time and go over some of the assignments on my own time to make sure I really understood everything, so I wasn't let down when the midterm came along or when the final came along. So that was another type of experience I had with working with people. And I think the big takeaway from both of those experiences is different people will require different types of strategies, and you just kind of got to be adaptable to who you're working with.
Cool. So I think you nailed it immediately in the first one. So then my feedback is going to be just forget the second one. You nailed it the first one. And I would say definitely also don't be afraid to look at how much time you have left in your phone interview when you're looking at your examples. So maybe you're like, oh, I have all these scenarios I want to do, but maybe you're looking at the clock and you're like, but I have 10 minutes left in this phone interview and we haven't talked about the next steps. So I'm going to stick to one. So definitely feel free to again, I think depth over breadth. And I actually would suggest sometimes just stick to one, so you can really focus on that one. And it also makes it easier for the interviewer to focus. And if you're not sure if you want to like do a second example, you can always say like, hey, did that answer your question, or did you want me to give you another example? And the interviewer might just say, actually, no, that was good. I actually have another question here. And then they're sort of prompting you like, let's go to the next question. That's the only feedback I'd get there. But otherwise, I liked the example and I felt like you checked what I was looking for.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, last question here. So tell me about a time, and everything is covering the rest of that question for me right now. So I'm going to read it in my chat. Tell me about a time you had to learn something you didn't know a lot about. And how did you learn the ropes? Anyone have an example?
Sarah does.
Cool, go for it.
Hi. So over this past summer, I had an internship, and my bosses assigned me to learn a new programming language, which I've never heard of before, and it's not really widely used. It's called Go. So when I was approaching this situation, I would constantly ask my bosses for different resources that they'd recommend for me to get a head start and learning the actual inner workings of the language. So when I received my actual project, I still was a bit unsure of how to exactly navigate the programming language and how I should implement it in the project that I was given. So my project was to basically build like a security scanner for a product that they were designing. I can't really give much more detail because it is like a government contractor, but yeah, so once I actually started working on the project, I was still having some trouble, and my bosses, obviously, they're very busy people. They're not available all the time to answer all of my questions. So I reached out to another coworker who wasn't as like higher up on the rungs as my bosses were, and he had the free time to always answer my questions and give me examples and help me whenever I needed it. So we'd always collaborate during his free time, and we were able to kind of work on the project together, and he showed me the ropes. I mean, I was that was right after graduating high school this past summer, so I didn't have as much experience as some of the college kids that were on co-op did. So my bosses were obviously very understanding of this, and once I got the project finished, they were very impressed by the way that I was able to adapt and learn the language real quickly. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It was a great learning experience, and I really enjoyed it.
Cool. Yeah, I loved it. I love, when, especially if you're in engineering, if you get a question about like, tell me about a time you learned something, talking about how you had to really scrappily learn a new programming language is always like a pretty solid one, because then they're like, good, because we have a coding language you've never used on this job. Surprise, you're gonna have to learn it. So usually that's a really easy like way to tie what you've done into what you're going to do on the job. So I like it. And yeah, sometimes don't be afraid if you have like a really strong like NDA, like non-disclosure agreement, or if you worked in like a security or government contract. I know some even don't let you say what company you worked for, and some are really like airtight. And I always feel bad for folks who are like, well, I can't tell you the company or the name of what I worked on or too much about what I worked on. And I'm like, don't worry, just tell me like who you worked with, maybe what language you learned and what it solved could be great. There's ways to work around like a really strict NDA that you're under. Cool.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay. Yeah, I loved it. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to share those with me. I hope that was helpful. I feel like tell me about a time questions can always freak people out. So I think just doing a little bit of practice and also just that moment of like hearing the question and having to come up with an example, I think always freaks people out at first. But always know you don't have to immediately like come up with an example. You can always say, ooh, good question. Let me think about that one. That's mine. When somebody asks me something I don't quite know, I'm like, ooh, that's a really interesting question. Let me think about that. And then I take my time. So feel free to create your own little verbal pause cue. But yeah, any last questions for me before we end here? I think it's a little over 8, and I think that was the end of it. So any last things for me before we hang up? No?
Thank you so much for coming. This was wonderful. I learned a lot. I hope the rest of everyone else learned as much as I did and enjoyed it.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you. You do too.
Okay.